Camilla Parker Bowles has had a very rough few weeks, and from everything sources are saying, it's only going to get worse from here. There's a story developing inside Buckingham Palace right now that honestly feels like it's been building for 30 years, and it involves two of the most unlikely people joining forces, Princess Anne and Prince William.
She got everything she wanted. The man, the title, the coronation, the tiara that had sat on Queen Elizabeth's head for decades, placed on hers in front of the world. By every measurable standard, Camilla Parker Bowles won, and for a while it looked like the story was over. But there are two people inside Buckingham Palace who never accepted that ending. One of them is 43 years old, controls £1.2 billion in royal assets, and watched his mother's marriage be destroyed in real time as a child. The other is in her 70s, has served this institution for over 5 decades, and has access to a room at Windsor Castle that almost nobody else can enter. They are not acting out of impulse. They are not acting out of anger. Sources suggest they have been building something quiet, patient, and permanent. And Camilla is only now beginning to understand the full shape of what that is. Act 1. The phone call that started it. About 3 weeks before this story began circulating, a senior palace aide made a phone call, not to the press, not to a government minister, not to any of the standard contacts you reach when managing a royal communication situation, to a lawyer, on behalf of Princess Anne, about Camilla. The call lasted less than 10 minutes, short, precise. According to sources, the kind of conversation someone has when the decision is already made and they simply need to confirm the path is clear. That call, sources say, was the first move in something considerably larger. Now, Anne has been a member of this family for over 70 years. She watched everything unfold in real time. The affairs, the separation, the panorama interview, the divorce, Diana's death. She managed her feelings about all of it with the same discipline she applies to everything. Professionally, privately, and without public comment. So the question worth asking is, why now? Sources say. The answer has 2 parts, and you need both of them to understand what's actually happening inside that palace. Act 2, the Duchy and the First Message. The first part is William. His position inside this institution has fundamentally shifted over the past 18 months. He is no longer simply waiting in the wings. He is making real financial decisions with real consequences. And the Duchy of Cornwall is where that becomes impossible to ignore. £0.2 billion. Land, property, investments, tenant farms, the Isles of Scilly, Dartmoor land rights, commercial holdings accumulated across nearly 700 years of royal estate management. All of it under William's direct and sole control. No consultation required, no approval needed. The clearest signal of how William intended to use that control came quietly, with no public statement. Annabel Elliot, Camilla's younger sister, interior designer, employed across duchy properties under Charles for nearly 20 years, earning between $19,000 and $82,000 annually depending on the project, disappeared from the financial records the moment William assumed control of the duchy. No dispute, no explanation, no replacement from Camilla's circle. William brought in his own people, friends from his personal network, godparents of his children, people loyal specifically and exclusively to him. Royal commentators noted it immediately. The ripples inside the palace were significant. That single decision sent a message that required no translation. Anne watched it happen. Sources say she approved completely, and according to those same sources, it opened a conversation between Anne and William that had been waiting years to take place. Because both of them, for very different but deeply personal reasons, had arrived at the same conclusion at roughly the same time. Done waiting. Act 3, the room at Windsor Castle. The second part of the answer is Diana. August 31st, 2027 will mark 30 years since Diana died in a Paris tunnel, 30 years since a 15-year-old William walked behind his mother's coffin through the streets of London while the entire world watched. He is now 43, a husband, a father of 3, and in nearly 3 decades of public life, he has never once made a direct statement connecting his feelings about Camilla to his feelings about what his mother endured. He never had to. His actions have been making that statement consistently for years. Anne reached a point, sources say, sometime in the past several months, where she decided she was done. Done allowing institutional loyalty to override private conviction. Done watching Camilla occupy spaces, literal and symbolic, that sources suggest Anne believes belong to Diana's legacy rather than to the woman who spent years contributing to Diana's suffering. And when Anne decided to act, she had access to something that is now making certain people inside Buckingham Palace genuinely nervous. There is a room at Windsor Castle called the Royal Archives. No tourists, no documentary crews, no public access. What it contains is the unfiltered, privately recorded history of the British royal family. Letters, diaries, internal correspondence, the written record of what was actually happening inside the institution during its most turbulent decades, including the years when Charles and Diana's marriage was visibly and catastrophically falling apart. Princess Anne has access to those materials at a level very few people outside the immediate family possess. Sources suggest she has been reviewing them. The broad strokes of that period are already public: the 1992 separation, the Camilla-gate tapes, Charles's television confession, Diana's panorama interview, the divorce, the crash, all of it documented, analyzed, and debated across 30 years of books and journalism. What sources suggest is in those archives goes beyond the B. Road strokes. It is the specificity, the private, contemporaneous written record of who knew what and when, who facilitated what, how Diana's concerns were received and handled inside an institution that was simultaneously managing its own interests. The internal dimension of a situation the public record only partially captures. According to sources familiar with Anne's alleged archival review, those materials tell a story about institutional failure that goes considerably further than anything publicly available has ever documented. Anne's position, sources say, is straightforward. The historical record of that period should be complete and unredacted, and the woman now sitting beside the king at every state occasion has no right to shape how the most painful chapter of Diana's life gets remembered. That conclusion, sources say, has implications for Camilla that go well beyond property or payroll. Act 4. The symbols being quietly removed. Here is where the story becomes more layered still, because what William and Anne are allegedly doing runs on two simultaneous tracks: history and money. On the financial track, William has been using duchy control with a precision that Camilla's circle is only now fully appreciating. The Annabel Elliot removal was the opening move. What sources describe as following it was broader: access to crown events, invitations that had previously been extended to Camilla's wider family, proximity to official occasions, all of it quietly narrowed, methodically, deniably, and without a single announcement that could be pointed to publicly. Each individual decision unremarkable on its own, collectively, according to sources, unmistakable. And then there is what William has been doing with duchy-connected philanthropic resources, which sources describe as entirely intentional. He has been redirecting a portion of those resources to war, D causes Diana originally championed, mental health, homelessness, HIV awareness, the causes Diana made her own during her lifetime, the ones the establishment initially resisted because they were considered too raw, too political, too emotionally direct for a senior royal to engage with. Diana touched them anyway. The institution made her pay an institutional price for it. Now her son controls $1.2 billion in assets and $30 million in annual income. And sources say he is pointing a portion of that toward exactly the places his mother pointed when the institution she belonged to was working to contain her. On the symbolic track, Anne is allegedly shaping something equally significant and equally quiet. When Camilla walked into Westminster Abbey on her coronation day wearing the Girls of Great Britain and Ireland tiara, Queen Elizabeth's personal favorite, the one that appeared on British banknotes for decades, it was a statement, a signal that the rehabilitation was complete, that Camilla had arrived. For her supporters, it was a triumphant moment. For others inside that palace, sources suggest it was a clock starting, because that tiara will one day sit on Catherine's head, and when that moment arrives, everything Camilla's coronation represented will be symbolically overwritten in a single image. Sources suggest Anne and William both understand that perfectly, and are not waiting passively for it. Royal patronages have been redistributed since Queen Elizabeth's death in 2022. Sources suggest Anne has been involved in certain patronage decisions in ways that have quietly shaped that redistribution. Specific high-profile patronages that were being positioned toward Camilla allegedly redirected, reflecting priorities rather than logistics. In 2025, Charles granted William and Catherine the authority to issue royal warrants, a privilege historically guarded carefully by monarchs. The signal was clear: the crown's symbolic weight is being deliberately repositioned toward the next generation. Toward William and Catherine, away from everything associated with the current reign, including Camilla. Act 5. The king who cannot argue back. Sitting in the middle of all of this is Charles. Sources describe a phone call he made to Anne in February of this year as one of the most difficult conversations between the two siblings in decades. Not angry, not accusatory, quiet and pained. The call of a man who understands exactly what his sister is doing and exactly why, and finds himself completely unable to argue against it with genuine conviction. The call lasted 40 minutes. It ended with nothing resolved. Charles is 76 years old. He was diagnosed with cancer in February 2024. He has maintained his public duties with genuine discipline throughout his treatment. But discipline is not the same as capacity. And protecting Camilla from what William and Anne are allegedly building requires exactly the kind of sustained, conflict-absorbing engagement he is least equipped for right now. Protecting her would mean telling William to restore access and privileges to people William deliberately removed. William would not comply. Charles knows it. It would mean telling Anne to stop whatever she is doing with the archives. Anne would not comply. Charles knows that too. It would mean positioning himself publicly against both his heir and his sister, simultaneously in defense of the woman that millions of people still associate with his first wife's suffering. The political and personal cost of that position is one Charles cannot afford. But sources describe something deeper than political calculation at work, something more painful. Charles knows why William and Anne feel what they feel, because he was there, because he was the cause of it. He is the man who conducted the affair that Diana described in terms of PR, found personal devastation. He is the reason that grief exists. How do you argue against your son's grief over his mother when you are the reason that grief exists? Sources suggest Charles cannot make that argument because he does not fully believe it himself. He allegedly expressed to a senior aide during this period not anger at William and not frustration with Anne, but understanding. The understanding of a man who knows that the people moving against his wife are doing so for reasons he himself created, and who has no answer for that. There is a version of this story that looks like revenge. William and Anne systematically dismantling everything Camilla built as payback for what she did to Diana. But sources suggest the second version is closer to the truth, and it is more considered and more lasting than revenge. Simple revenge would look like one dramatic, public moment of humiliation. That is not what sources describe. What sources describe is more patient, more permanent, and ultimately more meaningful. Think about what Diana actually stood for. Not the image, but the substance. She walked through active minefields in Angola. She sat with AIDS patients when the establishment still treated the disease as shameful. She looked homeless people in the eye and treated them as fully human in a way that senior royals were simply not supposed to do. She did all of this against the active resistance of an institution that found her threatening. She was right. The institution was wrong. William knows this not as historical analysis, but as lived experience. He watched his mother be right while the institution punished her for it. Now he runs the institution. Sources suggest William's modernization agenda is not simply good management. It is Diana expressed institutionally. The emotional intelligence she was told was inappropriate. The public accountability she was told was dangerous. The genuine human connection she was told was beneath royal dignity. All of it allegedly being built into the architecture of the monarchy will. Is constructing, and Camilla, sources suggest, is slowly and painfully coming to understand the full shape of what that means. She won the battle, she got Charles, she got the title, she got the coronation and the tiara. But the war was never about Charles. It was about Diana, about what Diana represented, about whether the institution Diana tried to change would eventually become something worthy of the price she paid. William and Anne are allegedly building that institution now. Not for revenge, for legacy. And you cannot argue against a legacy. You cannot litigate grief. You cannot outmaneuver a son who watched his mother die and spent 28 years deciding quietly and deliberately what to do about it. So, where do you stand on this? Is what William and Anne are allegedly doing justice, legacy, or something that crosses a line? And do you think Charles will ever find a way to push back, or is his silence already the answer? Drop your thoughts in the comments. This is one of the most layered stories inside the royal family right now, and I genuinely want to know how you're reading it. If you're new here, subscribe. There is significantly more of this story still developing, and you'll want the full documented account when it does. And if this video gave you a clearer picture of what's actually happening behind those walls, hit like. It helps more people find this content and keeps these conversations going. She got the crown. But sources suggest the two people who are always watching have been building something she never prepared for, not revenge. Something better than revenge.